Welcome to the Red Chair Podcast, a bite-sized podcast for associations and nonprofits covering the latest trends and issues facing association leaders. This episode discusses how virtual events are important for associations. All right, with me today is Brooke Passy. Brooke, if you can introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, Kevin. My name is Brooke Passy. I am a senior meeting manager at Association Headquarters. I've been at Association Headquarters for about 13 years, and I work 100% for the most part right now with the Wound, Ostomy, and Continence Nurses Society as their meeting planner.
Awesome. So association events went virtual in 2020 out of necessity, but a lot of them found out that those events had some staying power, if not entirely, only at least components of it. What did we learn about virtual events in 2020 that shaped events in 2021 and beyond?
I think we just learned to get past the fear of technology, especially working with nurses as an example. That was always sort of one of the barriers, right? Are they going to know how to log in and how is it going to work? And is it going to be weird talking to nobody? And the answer to all of those things might still be yes. But I think we didn't have a choice, right? So we had to push past some of the things that I think held us back from looking into doing more things virtually before. And once we got past the fear of the unknown, I think a lot of us realized that there are just certain things where the virtual environment sort of lends itself to those events. And I think it depends on the demographic and the association, but it can be everything from a board meeting where you're saving the money of flying 30 people into the same conference room for one night, all the way to true educational events where you're just getting a larger audience because the virtual platform allows you to have people jump on and off when they're available throughout the day, or possibly sit in front of their computer for a Saturday but not have to also pay for travel and things like that. So I think it forced our hand, but if the association was able to and has taken the time to sort of evaluate what went well and what didn't, I think that there are a lot of places where virtual meetings will help us sustain and also probably help us slightly financially in some of the recovery that a lot of associations are going through as well.
So for AH's upcoming edition of the Virtual Events Planning Guide, we highlighted research that shows experience is a driving factor in virtual and hybrid events going forward. How can association meeting and event planners create memorable experience for attendees in virtual events?
Yeah, absolutely. We're all, as I guess it's one of the hit phrases right now is Zoom fatigue, right? So we're all tired of just sitting and staring at our computer. But the truth is, if you take time to create interaction and experience, then you're still going to sit in front of your computer. I mean, think about it. We're not all tired of sitting and staring in front of our television, right? So how do you get people's attention? How do you keep their attention? And how do you involve them? It can seem hard, but I actually think that it's not. You just have to think a little bit differently. And again, everything in the virtual world is scalable. So, I've been able to test out a lot of different things. It can be as simple as, adding polling to a presentation, right? Because the minute you see that question pop up, you want to answer it. You want your voice to be heard. You want to feel like you're part of the session. Then it can also be doing some interactive things at break times, right? I've tried everything from chair yoga to trivia, even just putting on the ocean, like a live cam pointed at the Pacific Ocean, just for the visual and audio break of hearing, ocean waves crashing, maybe first thing in the morning. And by the afternoon, we're playing music. Again, it doesn't have to be expensive. So one of the other things I've done too is I've actually, for something more like a board meeting, when making them sign up for the event, we actually asked them what their favorite song right now was. And we made a playlist. And during breaks, we would play that playlist. And not only was it cool to just have a random mix of music, but it also, again, everyone wants to feel like they're a part of it, even in a silly Zoom meeting. So all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're like, oh my God, that's my song. They didn't even know necessarily why we asked them for the song recommendation. So it's just about making them feel like they're part of it. And then I can tell you I've gone as far as to create, wine tastings. I did one of those as well. Lots of times for our leadership, when we're in person, there's some sort of large dinner and sort of social interaction that is relaxed, right? That's removed from the business that we're there to take care of. So I did also team up with a local company that was working with a winery, and we did a food pairing and wine tasting event. And I had a lot of feedback on that, that not only was it great and a nice way to end a long day of meeting talk, but they also said, sometimes it's even easier than if you're trying to be at dinner with 14 people. You got the Brady Bunch sort of on your screen, but the truth is you can actually like see and talk to all of those people pretty well too. So I think it's just a matter of taking a minute to think about the fact that these are still people who want to feel like they're part of something, and how can you do that in a virtual world. And like I said, you can do things all the way from free to not so free. But yeah, I mean, they want the experience. They want that. Again, like I said, we're tired of staring at a screen, but we're not tired of watching TV or movies or things like that. And it's because those things pull you in, right? They make you part of an experience. And I think that's just something planners have to take a minute to think of.
Are planners trying to make the in-person experience come into the virtual event experience now?
I think some are. I think you got a lot of different kinds of planners out there. I think there are plenty of planners who are just ready to get back to in person. And I think even in the transition, there are some planners who learned the hard lesson that typically you can't take an in-person meeting and just copy and paste it into the virtual world, right? So instead of doing that, and some tried and it didn't work, or certain pieces didn't work, but I think there's the way of being like, okay, so we used to have this reception. I can't put that in the virtual world, so I'm not going to do it or whatever. Well, a couple of things are happening. One is in the last, not only year, but probably like 6 months, there are now a million companies doing all these kinds of things because they had to pivot too, helping you to create a reception feel virtually and things like that. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think the key component is the strategy or the goal, right? So instead of thinking to yourself, oh, I had this reception and I need to copy and paste it from virtual to in person, it's more of like, what was the point of that reception, right? Like, were they there to chit chat with their friends and have wine? Because if so, something like the wine tasting is perfect. Or were they there to really try to interact with your leadership or thought leaders or things like that? And if that's the case, then I think there are ways to create networking spaces virtually, but you're just going to have to tailor them to being more, educational based, or maybe there's question and answer, things like that. So I think you just have to take a minute and think about what's the point of this activity, and then how does that point translate virtually? Because sometimes it's going to look very similar, but sometimes it's going to look really different.
Mhm. So, can you speak to association leaders' expectations about the cost of these events and key considerations, as well as their value of the data and how they might leverage them in terms of sponsorship? Just threw a lot at you there.
Yeah, I think that the ROI from everybody has to and has shifted. Hopefully. um, but I think, and that goes to all stakeholders. So that's not just to executive leadership or staff, but it's also to your sponsors and exhibitors. The transition there has been really hard as well too, because if you want to talk about something that doesn't translate, well, you can't make an exhibit hall in the virtual world that replaces a physical exhibit hall. It's not going to happen. But I think a lot of it goes back to what's the point, and I don't mean that in a flippant sort of way. I just mean that in sort of like at the core. What are the expectations? What does the exhibitor want out of this? What does the leadership want out of this? What do our attendees want out of this? And then you have to sort of figure out how to make that work in the virtual world. Like I said, I think there's a lot of cool new softwares and stuff like that to help people facilitate. But if it doesn't match the point, then no matter how much it costs, it's not worth the money, right? And I think everybody's big concern is the money, and there's a lot of conversation too about hybrid and how it's just like 2 meetings and it's going to cost us twice as much. And I don't think that's true. I think that, again, if you focus on strategy and goal, and you focus on collaboration and scale, I think you'll actually find it's all pretty doable. So I think some of the things that we've learned, and I've sort of always had a pretty good relationship with our main stakeholders for the meeting that I work on, but I think virtually you have to actually have conversations with your sponsors. Like, you can't just give them a menu anymore, right? Because trust me, floor stickers are great in person, but they don't translate virtually.
No, they
You know,
don't.
and so the question too is for them, like, what do they want? What are they looking for? There are some things that translate pretty well. Virtual photo booths are a really good replacement for in-person photo booths, and you can still do the same sort of branding that you could do in person from like a sponsorship opportunity. But floor stickers are gone. You know, and I can put a banner or I can put your logo in a million places online, but the expectation also shifts now because, you know, I don't have to pay to print that banner, but if it's online and I'm an exhibitor, I sure as heck want to see the traffic, right? Is it clickable? Where is it going? All that kind of stuff. So I think it sort of goes back again to like, what's the point? What's the goal here for everybody? And then I think you also just have to be willing to scale things back, right? So I don't know. I'm trying to think what it was because it wasn't the Oscars. Maybe it was the Grammys. There was some big award show and they did it virtually and everybody loved it. And then I heard all these meeting planners be like, oh, but we could never do that. Well, no, of course you couldn't, but you're also not planning the Grammys, right? So like the question there is sort of like, what did you like about it so much, right? And what do your attendees like about it so much? Like, and you need to figure out where is the money worth it, right? So maybe production is really important. Maybe interaction is really important. Maybe education is really important, you know, and there are certain ways to do all of these things at different price points, and you can't spend the top tier pricing on every single component. Nobody can. But I think you just have to decide where to spend your money. And some of that comes, again, based on what's the goal and what's the strategy.
So we're going to go take a real quick focus on event content. So after an event's over, how might event planners, committees, volunteers, and other stakeholders come together to extend the event's content's life?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the expectation now, right? Like
Yeah.
now that everything is virtual, like you can't expect me to sit here for 3 days and listen to your conference, but I'm still going to register for it because I want 3 days worth of content.
Yep.
You know, and there are a few things. I think if you're paying for your live virtual event, I think one of the benefits is you expect extended access, right? So that's sort of a given at this point now. But, you know, I think there are also associations that are showing that you can repackage it, right? So maybe people missed registering for the live event or didn't really think they were going to be at their computer that weekend or day or whatever. And now their colleagues are saying like, oh, so good you missed it, right? Well, so now you have the opportunity to repackage it and say like, hey, did you miss it? Don't worry. You know, here you go. You can still do this. That being said, there's also something to like splicing it up, right? Like maybe you can categorize it by topics or things like that and turn them into smaller packages, right? I know that in the virtual world, a lot of associations, I mean, I think associations were fighting the membership crisis even before COVID, right? Especially with the next generation, you know, is membership here to stay? You know, people are trying all different things there. And I also think the cool part about the virtual world is it gives you the opportunity both as a person and as an association to try different things. You know, maybe you can use some of the content as a recruitment tool. Maybe you can go after somebody who's not necessarily your standard member, but could use the same kind of education that you provide. And so now, like, I can use WOCN real quickly as just an example to sort of explain what I'm saying. So we are a nursing organization. But if I were to take, you know, 5 wound care sessions, well, PTs need wound care education, doctors need wound care education, right? So yes, I can repackage things and market them to my members. Cool. But this also gives you the opportunity to sort of take possibly like certain groupings of education and go after like peripheral members, right? People who aren't necessarily members, but maybe could be, or even if they have no interest in your membership, still really need your education.
So what was there any unexpected thing to come out of all of this that can make associations events better going forward?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm going to get in trouble for using the same words a million times, but I think the strategy of it, I think it's also made us all reevaluate things, right? So there are plenty, especially in the association world, there are plenty of events that sort of get copied and pasted every year, right?
Yep.
We did this last year, we pasted, we put a new logo on it, we call it 2021 instead of 2020. We fill in all the same educational spots. It's this many days, it's this many hours. I think this sort of forced people's hand, right? Just like it forced us all to embrace technology in a way that we necessarily wouldn't have. I'm hoping that it has forced some associations to say, like, is this award ceremony still really fulfilling us? How did we do it virtually? I know a lot of associations that nixed them virtually, especially associations that have meetings last spring because the pivot was just too quick to sort of like conceptualize it. And so now it's sort of like, okay, cool. So we didn't do that and nobody died. Do we need to do it again? Like, do we bring it back? Do we bring it back the way that it used to be? Or maybe here's a way to bring it back in a totally different way.
So you were just talking about strategy. How is it different from in-person to virtual? And then how will it be different now going into 2021 and 2022? Especially if we're going to have components of virtual in-person events.
So I don't think it should be different, but I think that it is. I think that for far too long, in-person events are sometimes sort of siloed from the rest of the association. And part of that, too, is just because in a lot of cases in associations, they bring in a large amount of money, right? So sometimes they sort of get to make decisions that aren't necessarily totally aligned with the association because it's good for the event or things like that. And I think and I hope that what virtual has done is it's made everybody sort of talk to each other more. Because the other thing that people who don't work in events don't think about is like we're planning events 2, 3, 4 years ahead of time. And if your event planner isn't sort of incorporated into the understanding strategy of your association, you're missing out. Because what happens, and I've seen this happen in live events, is your society has some strategic planning meeting and they go, yes, perfect, we're going to add this to our in-person conference. Well, if it affects anything about like the number of days of your event or something like very what seems logistical, but based on your association, like you may have a contract with 4 or 5 cities ahead of you, and whatever it is that the society is looking to do, it can't get factored in like that. So I think if there's more conversation between all the parts of the association, you give your meeting planner a heads up. You also give your meeting planner the opportunity to say like, okay, cool. Like I understand you want to get to this goal, but the way you're suggesting to get to this goal can't happen for 4 years. So how can we try to get to this goal sooner? And then 4 years from now, we can go like exactly the way you want or things like that. But I find that that's sort of a disconnect that was very prevalent in in-person meetings. And I think in the virtual world, everybody sort of got forced. It's funny. Everybody got forced apart, but yet they got forced to communicate because they were physically forced apart. And I think the more that you can sort of be cohesive under the association umbrella, the better off you are. And I also think, people say that hybrid is 2 events. Well, it is and it isn't. But I also think you got to look at your team, right? So you might not need 2 meeting planners. What you might need is somebody who's really good with virtual platforms. And maybe that person's on your marketing team, right? And so now you don't need 2 meeting planners, but you need this person in charge of the in-person stuff, and this person's going to handle virtual. So I just think if the strategy of the association and the communication between volunteers and staff, as well as within volunteers and staff, can sort of grow with events as we move forward, you're just going to see the ability for everything to not feel so hard or new or scary, and hopefully to sort of just find this way of focusing on the needs of your members and your stakeholders and how every single arm of your association can kind of work together to get there.
All right, Brooke, thank you so much for talking to me.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Red Chair Podcast. Head over to associationheadquarters.com so you don't miss any new episodes. Next up, we'll be discussing the applications of ASAE Foresight Works in a post-COVID world.